If you were to look back at the year of 2020 through a VueFinder, what would you see? Well, you'd probably see the pandemic, unfortunately. You'd also see JavaScript enjoying a 25th birthday. But what you would also see is the fact that images were going through a bit of a renaissance, reaching this inflection point. In fact, we had hit this point that we had never really seen before, kind of like seeing Halley's Comet or going from an Intel Mac to an M1. But we're talking about images, and images, they're like stories, really. You could be the best writer, write Shakespearean sonnets, but you know what they say about pictures? They're worth 1,000 words. Well, a great image is worth 1,001 words. Take, for example, these shots from the Mars lander from, I guess, last month, Perseverance. This is amazing. The fact that we're able to see some of these photos come back to us from Mars. These two in particular, I think, really freak me out because you could actually see from this angle, this is the Martian sky, I suppose. But the best part is that these photos made it from the Perseverance lander through space all the way to Earth and made it to the internet for us to enjoy. Speaking of internet, our story starts on the internet. Surprise, surprise. And specifically in February of 1993, at the National Center of Supercomputing Applications, where the Mosaic browser was born, a gentleman by the name of Mark Andreessen sent an email, and it read something like this. I'd like to propose a new optional HTML tag, IMG, images. Now, imagine for a hot second how inconceivable it would be to have the web without images. It would look and sound probably like this. You know why? Because no one added the alt tags. Shout out to my man Jonathan, who spoke earlier about some accessibility. But again, imagine the web without images, almost impossible. So at the time, Mark Andreessen and his buddies felt that including images on the web would create some kind of experimentation, and developers would fight tooth and nail to try to get photographs onto the web. And he was correct. And eventually, all that experimentation led to images being included online. So, in fall of 1995, specifically November, HTML 2.0 was introduced, and with it came the IMG tag for images, which means that the image tag, yes, turned 25 last November. And this started our pathway to this very moment. And we're going to talk about that. So I'd like to wish everyone a good and late afternoon, Dom. That's how I like to greet everyone on a daily basis. My name is Henri. You can find me at Henri Helvetica on Twitter. When I'm not out here doing my thing in the greatest city on the planet, in Toronto, Canada, I am out there on a run. I'm a distance runner, and I share it with this hashtag #DevsWhoRun. I'd like to welcome everyone to my talk, which is entitled Looking Through the VueFinder, focusing on the future of image formats. Thank you very much, VueConf, for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Now, I'll be sharing my slides through this address right here, bit.ly/VueConf_VueFinder. If you missed that, you'll be able to catch it on pretty much every slide at the bottom left. And at the bottom right, you're going to see my Twitter handle in case you have any questions during the talk as well. Now, since we are going to talk about the future of images, it would be impossible to not set it up by talking about the images that we have at current or the ones previous. So in order to assess where the future of formats is going to take us, let's go through a little retrospective right now. Graphics interchange format, better known as the GIF. Correct. It is a lossless format, so it's big and heavy. It had transparency, or still has it basically, 256 colors, some animation, and in fact, that very animation is what keeps it around to this very day. This is a format that came up in a bit of a different era, a little long on the tooth, but it's still here. And believe it or not, it's about 33 years old. Following that, we're going to talk about the portable network graphic, or the PNG, some call it PNG. Essentially, we also have another lossless format, Comes in two flavors, at least the ones that we know well, PNG 8 and PNG 24. This time we have an alpha channel, great for logos, photographs, etc., etc. But again, as a lossless format, it comes in kind of heavy. Believe it or not, you can get some animation out of the ping, but I strongly recommend that you do not. They're huge. Either way, this is a format that's almost 25 years old. Now, we'll follow that up with the Scalable Vector Graphic, SVG for short. Now, I put a little asterisk there. Why? Because it is the only non-raster format of the bunch that we're going to talk about. Now, the thing about not being a raster format, it is actually text, so it compresses very well. Scalable, it's great for logos as well. You can get some transparency out of that, or should I say an alpha channel, really. And it can be animated, but the SVG is just about 20 years old. And the last of the bunch, the last of the quartet, is the Joint Photographic Expert Group, also known as the JPEG. Now, finally, we are talking about a lossy format. Incredible for photos, which is probably why it's sort of like a web favorite. There is an alpha channel possible once you get into the variants like the JPEG 2000 or the JPEG XR. It is absolutely the workhorse of the internet. It is the most prominent format on the web right now. But this format as well is almost 30 years old. So when I think of these four formats, I really think of the Rolling Stones. Four old cats. And in fact, if you take the SVG, the PNG, the JPEG, and the GIF, they are combined 104 years old. So over a century in age. What does that mean, really? Well, it means we're very comfortable with these formats. It also means that we've known them all our internet lives. But like I said, it's kind of time for some new formats. But in keeping with this music theme, it would look something like this. Starting with vinyl, moving to CDs, to MP3s, and eventually some streaming. It's like mixing efficiencies and fidelity all in one. We're trying to have best of both worlds. So essentially, we're going to look at the past and current formats and take us through the future formats today, anyhow. Now, when discussing these formats, past and future, we have concerns, and they're like this: codec, congestion, and costs. Let's talk about that right now. The foundation of the whole internet is data compression. That's by Colt McCandless, an engineer out of Google. The internet works at its best when things are compressed. Absolutely. Now, I'm going to look at this photo right here because it's very exemplary of what I'm going to talk about. Compression is a delicate mix of science and art. So in this case, if you have too much art where your image is beautiful, incredible fidelity, pictures, the colors pop out, it probably doesn't have enough science, which is why the images are too big. But if you have too much science, things are too compressed, colors are muddied, and you have artifacts like in this photo right here, you probably have too much science. So the goal is to find a nice, comfortable mix of the two. And in fact, that is why codecs are very important, and specifically modern codecs. Now, when we talk about congestion, I like to basically break it down like this. Bandwidth. How much bandwidth do we have? Bandwidth has never been more important. Why? Well, we talked about it earlier. The pandemic really exposed some of these fissures that we had, and specifically COVID-19. Now, why is that? Well, we suddenly found ourselves working from home, learning from home, and I guess conferencing from home, which is what we're doing today. Earlier last year, Fastly released a bit of data with regards to internet traffic. And essentially, you can see right here that the internet traffic pretty much all the way around shot through the roof. And download speeds, for the most part, also went through the floor. So it was almost like a worst case scenario on both sides. Now, let's look at some data right here. Now, this data comes from the HTTP archive, and it is the total image bytes per web page. over a 2-year period. Now, unfortunately, desktop is up 50%, mobile up 82%. Not the best news. But if I look at the total image requests per web page over that same period, we have desktop, which is down 20% almost, and mobile down 15%. That may seem like good news, but once you start to do the math, you'll realize your page weight is up, images anyways, and your requests are down. So essentially, your images are coming bigger and bigger each and every time. Like I said, that's not the best news. We need lighter images. We need less weight on a page because, as you know, images for the most part are predominantly anywhere around 60% or more of a page's weight. So this essentially leads us to the next topic, which is costs, or here I'm calling it patents and royalties. We know there are costs associated with heavy pages. Data overages are something that we see, unfortunately, far too often. Data costs are something that we have to unfortunately incur, but some people don't realize that when it comes to formats and images, there are patents and royalties that come into play. iPhone users may remember this. HEIF, well, it's a format that I thought was amazing because you had fantastic fidelity, you had great compression, but unfortunately, it was a patent nightmare, which is why this format never really made it out to the web, which I was expecting at some point when Apple made that announcement a few years ago. In fact, let's go back in history. The GIF, in fact, had a patent dispute, and that dispute also led in part to the creation of the PNG. So patents can hamper a format's proliferation, if not success. So these are things that we keep in mind when creating or advocating for new formats. Now, back to the 4 that we had spoken about earlier. We just looked at these formats. They're here listed in a bit of popularity, but let's talk about not them, but the future. So what does the future look like? Well, the future looks like, well, the need for modern development. And with modern development, you need modern formats. And seeing that images are the most abundant resource, they can provide the most abundant savings. We can agree to that. And seeing that the JPEG is the most abundant format, it will provide the most abundant savings as well. I think that's true. So that being said, I'd like to introduce you to the JPEG XL. And you might wonder, what's that? Well, let's talk about the JPEG XL. For the 25th anniversary of the JPEG, the governing body asked for a submission or put out a CFP and asked for submissions to improve the format. So 7 submissions were made, 2 were selected. One by team from Google. They had been working secretly on this format called PIC, and one by Cloudinary, who had also been working on this format called the Free Universal Image Format, which stands for FUIF. They combined forces to create what would be the JPEG XL. So what is it about the JPEG XL? Well, let's talk about it. It's basically going to be sort of like a best case scenario for images. Alpha channel, awesome. It's going to be lossless, so great fidelity. It's going to have some animation. Again, animation is something we unfortunately cannot do without. It creates good user experience. Of course, it's going to have modern compression, high bit depth, legacy friendly, which means it's going to be backward compatible. Universal, meaning that they plan to essentially have the best features of all worlds, and it's going to be responsive. The most important part, or at least a very important part, is that it's going to be royalty free, so you will not end up with patent nightmares. Now, there's a bit of good news here. Earlier this year, the bitstream was frozen. So what does that mean? It means that software applications are now able to use the codec and actually include it in their apps. So if you wanted to add JPEG Excel support, you could from now on. And this happened earlier this year in January. Now, unfortunately, at this very moment, JPEG Excel support looks like this. Not that good. However, in good news, there is a open issue with Chrome, and they're actually trying to hold on. What? Okay, we have some breaking news. Hold on. As of today, the day of this recording, JPEG Excel was actually added to Chrome. This is absolutely, like, this happened earlier today. So I just thought I should add it to the slides and the presentation. So this is the beginning of browser support for JPEG Excel in Chrome. This is actually very big news. So we'll see what happens from here on in, but it's probably going to show up behind a flag very soon. We're in April, so I'm going to say potentially May or June, something like that. But you'll probably see it on Twitter. I just had to share that. I thought that was kind of cool. So let's move forward. AVIF. Now, you might think to yourself, what's AVIF? AVIF, AVIF. It is another format. It is born out of a video format called AV1. AV1 is from this group called Alliance for Open Media. It's a kind of a conglomerate of companies who are banding together to create royalty-free formats. Now, when it comes to the AVIF and the AVIF format, it looks like this. Like I said, AV1 file format is what it is. The bitstream was frozen in 2019, very recently. So it's going to have 8, 10, and 12-bit depth, lossy and lossless capabilities, modern compression each and every time, of course. An alpha channel, high dynamic range, HDR. Animation is going to be possible, and it's going to have chroma subsampling at 420, 422, and 444. For those who don't know what that is, it's essentially a way of removing, some color information out from the image that will not really deter the image's look. And it's essentially playing with the human visual system. And of course, it's going to be royalty free. Now, I put a little asterisk right there, and that's simply because that there are some patent trolls who are always looking for opportunities to make some money. But for the most part, we believe that everything's fine with the AVIF or AVIF format. Now, if we look at some file size reductions in comparisons to some other formats, like the WebP, the JPEG 2000, the HEIF, the AVIF came out always on top. So they were able to create much greater compression with the AVIF format than not. And this is actually a study that came out of Netflix, I believe. And they used this Kodak test set. Now, let's get into some more interesting parts like AVIF support. Now, currently we have Chrome Desktop, Opera Desktop, and Firefox behind a flag. Now, I'm going to expand on this flag bit. February 23rd, they were supposed to go stable with AVIF support. Last second, something came up, a few issues, so they essentially yanked it from going stable. So that was delayed. But at this point, what they're going to do as of this month in April, if it's not this month, it will be next month. They will release support for AVIF in Firefox. It will be a work in progress, so I would say about 90% complete in terms of support, but you'll be able to use it nonetheless. In fact, you could use it today. It's behind a flag in Nightly, in Stable, and in Dev Edition of Firefox. Some more news, actually, and some very recent news. Android support for AVIF is going to be happening probably in Stable fall of 2021. At current, right now, you could actually use AVIF on Android in a developer preview. It's then going to move to beta during the summer. And like I said, hopefully ending up in a stable situation from sort of August onwards. Here's a shot of the actual details at the Android developer blog. You'll be able to read that. I'll supply the link. Now, in some more interesting news, AVIF support in Safari. Yes, believe it or not, it is being discussed. There is an open issue you'll be able to take a look at. And again, in relatively breaking news, it looks like Safari has updated the libraries required to bring themselves up to date. So that's Safari and WebKit. Again, I'll supply the link. You'll be able to see that. But the fact that they're already experimenting with the format, playing with the idea of adding it as a supported format in Safari is fantastic news. Now, let's take a look at the WebP. Now, the WebP is again born out of a video format. And let's look at the details. It was once upon a time believed that it would replace the PNG, the ping. Pound for pound, close. Aggressive codec, yes. Animation possible, yes. In fact, Tumblr uses animated WebP format. Lossy and lossless, yes. 8-bit depth, alpha 420 chroma subsampling, and it's a 10-year-old format, so it's been here for a little while. But the one thing I mentioned here, it was made for the web. And that's essentially true because the web needed small formats to sort of travel up and down the wire. And something like this, having 8-bit depth, 420 chroma subsampling, it kind of feeds into the narrative of what a format should be like on the web. Now, moving forward, let's take a look at WebP support. It's pretty much green across the board. And I say green because, can I use, et cetera, et cetera. But one more thing, as always, iOS 14 and Big Sur are supporting, or Safari on iOS 14 and Big Sur are supporting WebP. And that is big news. Now, the one thing I'd like to share is the following. There's always this narrative that Apple was, slow, delaying. They were, holding the web back because they weren't supporting WebP. Well, let me break it down to you. In fall of 2018 is when Edge essentially went stable with WebP support. In January of 2019 is when Firefox went with a stable support for WebP. And in fall of 2020 is when Safari showed up. So in 3 consecutive years, the last 3 years of this 10-year period for the WebP is when 3 major browsers came aboard. I just wanted to share that because I feel there's this kind of like misinformation being discussed with respect to WebP and Safari. Moving forward, though, let's talk about the fact that Shopify serves WebP for their shop owners on their platform. And this is something that they talked about in July of 2019. And in fact, images engineer Cornel Lizinski, who's at Cloudflare, mentioned that, starting in 2020 or even, fall of 2020, you could potentially serve nothing but WebP. Now, he's actually being playful because he has some reservations about the fact that they're locked in at 8-bit. But he does have a point. You could probably get away with serving a lot of WebP today. So that being said, it would be very tough to talk about web performance in images without discussing WebP. Ding. Now, let's get into the details. Why is this all important? Why are we doing this? Well, we talked about codecs, right? Our concerns were the codecs, the congestion, and the cost. Well, let's bring in another C. That's contentful paint, specifically largest contentful paint, which is a metric that's part of the Lighthouse scoring. And if you do remember, for those who use Lighthouse, largely contentful paint is worth 25% of your Lighthouse score. And in fact, LCP and bad images are not a good mix. Now let's look at this tool right here, which is called PerfTrack by Hussein Jerde out of Google. And this looks at frameworks and some of their web vitals and some of their metrics. Now let's take a closer look at Vue, of course. Now we looked at 110,000 origins on Vue. And this is what their LCP looked like. 58% had an LCP of 2.5 seconds or lower, which is fantastic, green light. 20% were moderate, and 22% had a failing grade, and that's on Vue. At Nuxt level, we looked at just under 10,000 origins, and it was 52, 23, and 25 with, unfortunately, a failing grade. Now, if we look at image bytes, on Vue, again at the same 110,000, 51% of 51% of the origins had image bytes of 1 meg or greater, and on Nuxt it was 43%. Those 10,000 origins. So all that to say that we have some data to show that we could use some work at the images level. So let's talk about the solutions. What solutions are available to us today? Well, do you remember the picture tag? I certainly do. It's been around for a little while and it's being employed, which is amazing. But all you need to do at a very rudimentary level is set it up like this. AVIF support, we put it in first because you'll get the best compression out of that. Is there WebP support? There might be, so you put that in second. And if neither of those are supported, you could fall back to a JPEG. Now, like I said, at a rudimentary level, this is what you'd be able to do. But at the end of the day, this is part of what I talked about earlier, which is modern development. And if you look at what some are doing on the modern development level, these frameworks, these CMSs, these platforms, they're all employing the WebP. If not, some are using AVIF as well. Gatsby, Next, Contentful, Levity, Blitz, and so many more. Imagix, which is one of the sponsors here today. They're all moving the web forward with new formats. And of course, Nuxt Image. Now, I believe Debbie may have spoken about that earlier today. I'm sort of guessing that she would have. But either way, they're also going into that foray of future formats, and they're going to be able to supply some of these new formats through some of these services like Imagix, I believe, and a few others. With respect to tooling, what do we have? Well, we have Squoosh app, which is a client-side image compression app that also comes in a CLI flavor. ImageMagick is available. I believe the team at Google had created a Photoshop plugin for the WebP because that was tough to come about. And also GIMP, you'll be able to use WebP for sure. And I believe there's AVIF support at the GIMP level. And of course, you have CDNs and media management companies. Shout outs to, again, the sponsor, Imagix. Akamai, very well known. Cloudinary, also very well known. And Cloudinary is actually the only one out there, well, for now, that is supporting JPEG XL. Surprise, surprise. Well, they were behind the team anyways. Now, in conclusion, well, what does this all mean? Everything that I've talked about. Well, we're able to move the web forward. We're able to get compression. We're able to get modern sort of like compression and fidelity. So we have the formats that can be used today. AVIF for sure, WebP for sure. We have the tooling that can be used today. We have the services that can be used today. This is all part of the modern development conversation that we have, and it's all part of the modern image conversation that we have as well. Now, in closing, I'd like to mention that last fall, I had a series of speakers come together and talk about some of these images and what was going on the web. And you could actually take a look at that there. I did the same on a sort of developer experience level. Like I said, Levity, Sanity was there. I think Next.js as well as Gatsby, they all talked about what they're doing to handle images and the future formats. And lastly, I'd like to mention that I curate the Jamstack meetup Jamstack Toronto, it's called, but we're all online, so it's kind of like Jamstack UN. By all means, check it out if you're curious about modern development. And with that being said, merci. Thank you very much for your time. I enjoyed myself, and I believe I should be in the chat answering some questions. All right, take care.